Nobody announced it, but this is real. So, a Swiss brand older than Rolex just got switched off with no farewell. A mall chain quietly went from 220 stores to under 200. Somewhere in a jewelry case right now, a watch is sitting there with no restock coming, and the store does not know it yet. There's more, and it's worse news. 11 brands are going extinct. Some of them share one struggling parent company you have probably never heard of by name. One of them is being killed off by the single most profitable watchmaker on the planet. So, are any of your watches safe? Stick around to find out. Number 11. DKNY watches. DKNY watches were never trying to be a grail. They were the watch a mom bought herself with a Nordstrom gift card, the one that said, "Put together," without saying, "I spent money I do not have." Nobody collected them or flipped them on a resale app for triple retail. That is exactly why nobody is writing headlines about DKNY disappearing from stores. Ever notice how the brands nobody defends are usually the first ones to go quietly? DKNY has been a licensed name since the mid-90s, designed and shipped by a company most people wearing the watch have never heard of. That company is Fossil Group, and Fossil Group spent 2025 somewhere no watchmaker wants to be. Its UK subsidiary filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy protection late 2025, part of a broader debt restructuring. The parent company closed 28 stores globally over the past 12 months, dropping from 220 locations worldwide down to 193. 7 of those closures happened in the first quarter of 2026 alone, with as many as 15 total expected before 2026 is out. Think about what a store closure actually looks like from inside the mall, not from inside a spreadsheet. It is a manager boxing up display cases weeks before the sign comes down. It is a regional buyer quietly told not to reorder certain SKUs this season. Nobody frames that as the beginning of the end when it happens. It just looks like one ordinary Tuesday, repeated in 28 different locations over 12 months. So, when a DKNY watch stops showing up in the case at your local mall kiosk, it is not because DKNY did anything wrong on its own. It is because the company quietly assembling and shipping it is closing the case itself, one lease at a time, in cities you will never hear named. The regret shows up later, in a small and specific way. A woman finds the box in a drawer years from now, the one still stamped with the DKNY logo, bought for a coworker's retirement and never actually worn. She tries to look up a replacement battery online and finds 3 retailers, then 2, then a support page that has not been updated since last spring. She is not devastated. She is just a little confused, the way you get when something ordinary quietly stops existing and nobody thought to tell you. There is no farewell tour for a watch like this, no limited final run, no collector edition to mark the ending. It just gets quieter on shelves, city by city, until the case at the mall kiosk holds a different logo entirely, and none of the staff working there quite remember when the switch happened. DKNY going quiet was the warm-up. Brand number 10 shares the exact same address, the exact same balance sheet, and a much louder fan base that has no idea yet. Number 10. Tory Burch watches. Tory Burch built an entire aesthetic on one very specific promise. Your bag matches, your watch matches, your sensibility, and none of it looks like it tried too hard to get there. The watches were never the headline of the brand. They were the accessory to the accessory. The finishing touch nobody clocked as a separate purchase decision. And that is precisely the position that disappears first when a parent company starts making hard calls about shelf space and store leases. Because here is what nobody selling you a Tory Burch watch tells you at the counter. Fossil Group does not just make DKNY. It also makes Tory Burch under the exact same roof, run by the exact same finance team, backed by the exact same declining store count sitting underneath it. 2 names that feel like completely different brands to a shopper. One company, quietly running out of room for both. Imagine how many separate marketing teams that require. Tory Burch has its own creative direction, its own campaigns, its own carefully built sense of who its customer is. DKNY has an entirely different one. From the outside, a shopper would swear these are 2 competitors fighting for the same case space in a department store. They are not competitors at all. They are 2 departments inside the same struggling company, technically competing against each other for the same shrinking marketing budget. Watch the pattern build from here. It gets sharper with every brand on this list, and by the middle of the countdown, you will not need me to explain it anymore. DKNY and Tory Burch were the quiet ones nobody noticed leaving. The next brand built its whole identity on being the opposite of loud, and even that did not save it. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 9. Skagen. Skagen is different from the two brands before it, and that difference actually matters here. Fossil Group did not license Skagen the way it licenses DKNY or Tory Burch. Fossil Group bought Skagen outright back in 2012 because the Danish minimalist design language was worth owning permanently, not renting one contract cycle at a time. That should have made Skagen safer. Owned brands typically outlast licensed ones. There is no landlord somewhere in Italy or New York who can simply decline to renew. But here is the pivot, and it is a single sentence because it deserves to stand alone. Owning a brand does not protect it from a parent company that is closing its own stores. Skagen built its whole identity on ultra-thin cases, brushed steel, and a Scandinavian restraint that stood out in a market full of loud dials and logo-forward design. The people who bought Skagen watches were not chasing status. If anything, they wanted the opposite of status, a watch that looked expensive precisely because it looked like it never tried. By early 2026, that same understated design philosophy was sitting inside a company managing an active bankruptcy filing on one continent and store closures on another. Have you ever loved something specifically because it stayed quiet, only to watch it get quieter for all the wrong reasons? Honestly, this is the one that stings a little more than the rest of them for me. Not because Skagen was the biggest name on this list. It was never trying to be. It stings because it proves something uncomfortable. The logo was never actually the vulnerability. The ownership structure underneath the logo always was. Picture the person who bought a Skagen watch on purpose. Someone who walked past the Michael Kors case, past the Diesel case, and chose the one watch in the store that did not shout. That customer is not going to complain loudly online when the brand thins out. They are going to notice the empty spot on the shelf, feel a small, quiet disappointment, and just move on to something else understated. No petition, no outrage thread. Just one more restrained brand fading out in a way that matches exactly how it lived. Skagen never asked for attention, and that restraint did not save it. Brand number 8 went the opposite way, chasing attention with every square inch of its dial, and it is about to learn that volume does not buy protection either. Number 8. Armani Exchange Watches. Armani Exchange watches sold a very specific fantasy for a very specific price point. European tailoring, at a number a 25-year-old could actually afford without asking their parents. Big block letters across the dial, a logo that photographed well under bar lighting, a watch built to look expensive in a photo more than it needed to perform on a wrist for a decade. And for over 2 decades, it worked. Fossil Group has held the Armani Exchange license that whole time, alongside Emporio Armani itself, manufacturing both product lines under conditions the Armani Group in Milan does not directly control on a day-to-day basis. That distance is the story here. When a fashion house licenses out its watch division, it typically keeps design approval and the brand image. It does not keep the factory floor, the store lease negotiations, or the balance sheet those decisions actually live on. So Armani Group can stage a beautiful runway show in Milan every single season, full of tailoring and cameras and applause, and none of it touches what is happening 2 continents away inside a Fossil Group distribution center, currently working through a debt restructuring plan with lawyers instead of designers in the room. The gap between the glamour on the runway and the supply chain underneath it is exactly where these watches quietly stop showing up on shelves. It is a strange kind of scam nobody is actually running on purpose. The Armani name on the dial promises an entire universe of tailoring, cologne ads, and Milan runway lighting. None of that universe has anything to do with whether the watch itself ships to your local department store next quarter. The name sells the fantasy. A completely different company, one currently restructuring debt on another continent, decides whether the fantasy stays on the shelf. A licensing deal like this one is built to survive exactly this kind of storm, at least on paper. Armani Group keeps its brand equity untouched no matter what happens to Fossil. Fossil keeps a recognizable name to put on a dial no matter how its own factories are performing. The arrangement is designed so that one company's financial trouble should, in theory, never touch the other's reputation. In practice, the watches still have to physically ship from somewhere, and that somewhere is currently the part of the business under the most pressure. Everything up to this point has worn the same corporate parent. Brand number 7 does not. This one has no headquarters at all, just a few hundred backers watching a campaign page go silent. Number 7. The micro-brand shakeout. Now we step away from Fossil Group completely, because this next entry is not one single brand. It is dozens of them, and almost nobody outside the watch community is talking about it in plain language yet. Independent micro-brands, the kind that launch on Kickstarter with a name you have never heard and a design you genuinely cannot stop looking at, are dying at a pace. Collectors are actively documenting right now on forums like WatchUseek and WatchForum.com. I want to be precise here, because this one is different from the rest of the list. It is not a headline claim with a company statement behind it. It is a pattern collectors are tracking in real time, brand by brand, thread by thread, not something any single manufacturer has confirmed on the record with a press release. That distinction matters, and I am not going to blur it just to make the segment hit harder. 3 forces are doing the damage at once, and each one alone would be survivable. Stacked together, they are not. Movement costs from suppliers like Miyota and Seiko keep climbing every quarter. Import tariffs make bringing in cases and components from overseas noticeably more expensive than it used to be just 2 years ago. And Chinese factory brands, the very same factories many micro-brands quietly sourced their movements and cases from in the first place, have started selling nearly identical finished watches directly to consumers at roughly half the price. Why would anyone keep paying double for the boutique version of a watch when they can buy it straight from the factory that physically built it? That question stopped being rhetorical a while ago. It is the exact reason forum threads titled things like micro brands that have gone under keep getting longer, month over month, with new names added by people who backed the campaigns themselves and never got a watch. The forum culture around this is almost tender in a way that surprised me while researching it. Collectors post about brands they backed, brands that vanished, brands that somehow survived against the odds, treating them less like consumer products and more like small businesses run by people they half know personally. Because in a lot of cases, they genuinely do. This is the quiet part almost nobody outside the hobby understands about crowdfunded watches. When you back a micro-brand on Kickstarter, you are not really buying a finished product. You are prepaying a stranger to go build a supply chain in real time, using your money as the working capital. Most of the time it works out fine. When it does not, there is no store to walk into and complain, no return counter, no customer service line. There is a founder who has gone quiet on a comments page, and a few hundred people slowly accepting that the watch they paid for 2 years ago simply is not coming. Have you ever backed something on Kickstarter and quietly stopped expecting it to actually arrive? Fossil's brands go quietly, one licensing footnote at a time. Micro brands go quietly too, one Kickstarter backer at a time. Brand number 6 does neither. This one has a name you will recognize, and a fan base that would be genuinely angry if they connected the dots. Number 6. Diesel watches. Diesel built its entire identity on being the brand that did not care what anyone thought about it. Oversized cases you could feel on your wrist walking into a room. Aggressive, cluttered dials. Straps that looked like they belonged on a motorcycle instead of a wrist. It was never subtle, and it was never trying to be. That is exactly what makes this entry hurt more than DKNY or Tory Burch did earlier on this list. Diesel customers were rarely casual owners, simply picking an accessory off a shelf. They were loyalists who bought into an attitude, a whole personality wrapped around 48 millimeters of stainless steel. And that attitude is manufactured, licensed, and distributed by the exact same company already sitting inside a Chapter 15 filing, already closing stores by the dozen across 2 continents. Picture this for a second. A 23-year-old buys his first real watch in 2019, an oversized diesel chronograph. because it is the first one he has ever seen that actually looks like him instead of like his father's watch. By 2026, he goes looking for a replacement strap. The authorized retailer near him has quietly stopped carrying the brand. The website's support chat takes 4 days to answer a simple question. He does not need that strap badly enough to chase it any further. He just wanted confirmation the brand was still there, and nobody gave him one. It was never really about the strap. Do you think brand loyalty actually survives a company's bankruptcy filing, or does it just quietly transfer to whatever is still sitting on the shelf next to it? Diesel spent years selling rebellion as a lifestyle. Bold, loud, unapologetic. And that identity worked precisely because it felt like it belonged to nobody but the wearer. Nobody buying an oversized diesel chronograph in 2019 was thinking about Richardson, Texas, or a quarterly earnings call, or a UK subsidiary filing for bankruptcy protection years later. That distance between the fantasy on the wrist and the paperwork in a courtroom is the whole quiet tragedy sitting underneath every brand on this list so far. Everything so far has been fashion watches, wearing someone else's financial trouble. Brand number 5 is different. This one has 100 years of real diving heritage behind it, and none of that history is protecting it either. Number 5. Zodiac. Zodiac is the oldest name on this list that most casual buyers have never clocked as genuinely old. Founded in Le Local, Switzerland in 1882, and respected for decades among divers and vintage collectors for building actual tool watches, Zodiac got folded into Fossil Group's ownership back in 2001, alongside a whole cluster of Swiss manufacturing assets. Fossil was aggressively buying up at the time. For years, that ownership arrangement gave Zodiac a strange kind of shelter most fashion-adjacent brands never got. It was Fossil-owned, technically, but it was sold almost entirely to enthusiasts who understood the diving heritage and genuinely did not care much who signed the corporate paychecks behind the scenes. That shelter does not really exist anymore. Once a parent company starts filing for bankruptcy protection on one side of the Atlantic while shuttering nearly 30 stores worldwide on the other, every single brand sitting under that same roof gets exposed the same way, heritage or no heritage. 100 years of genuine dive watch history does not get a special exemption from a corporate restructuring plan. The lawyers running the numbers are not reading the brand's Wikipedia page before they decide what stays and what gets cut. For a certain type of collector, one who bought a Zodiac Super Seawolf specifically because it felt like it had earned its heritage rather than bought it, this is the quiet devastation of the list. Nobody outside the diving community will even notice. Is it worse to lose a brand nobody remembers, or a brand people specifically chose because it remembered something the rest of the industry had forgotten? There is no clean answer to that. Zodiac never had the sales numbers to make headlines when it struggled. It only ever had the loyalty of people who genuinely understood what it was, which turns out to be exactly the kind of loyalty a balance sheet cannot see. Zodiac's story ends in a dive shop nobody visits anymore. Brand number 4's story starts in a gift box, wrapped for a graduation that already happened years ago. Number 4. Kate Spade New York Watches. Kate Spade watches sold pure optimism. Bright colors, playful dials, a design language that refused to take itself too seriously even at full retail price. For a long stretch of the 2010s, it was one of the most dependable gift watch brands in the entire American market. The safe, joyful choice for a birthday or a graduation. The pivot here is simple, and it is the same one repeating for the 4th time on this list, which is exactly the point. Kate Spade New York watches are licensed and manufactured by Fossil Group, same as DKNY, same as Tory Burch, same as Armani Exchange, same as Diesel. By now you have probably stopped being surprised by that sentence. That is intentional. The surprise was never supposed to last past brand number 6 or 7 on this countdown. What is supposed to land right now is the sheer size of it. 6, 7, 8 household names, all quietly thinning out of different stores for the exact same underlying reason, and almost nobody outside a watch forum connecting the dots in public. Which one on this list did you actually own without ever once knowing who really made it? Think about what a Kate Spade watch was actually selling. Not precision, not heritage, a feeling, mostly, the sense that a gift could be thoughtful and colorful and a little bit fun without costing a fortune. That feeling does not transfer easily to a shrinking retail footprint. Optimism is a hard thing to keep manufacturing at scale once the company behind it is negotiating with creditors instead of designers. Every brand so far went quiet because a parent company ran out of room for it. Brand number 3 is about to go quiet on purpose, and somehow that is worse. Number 3. Patek Philippe. Select 2026 references. This entry does not belong with the rest of the list, and honestly, it should not. Patek Philippe is not filing for bankruptcy. Patek Philippe is not licensed out to anyone. If anything, Patek has the opposite problem. Too much demand chasing too little supply, wait lists measured in years instead of weeks. But you will not find it after this year applies here too, just for a completely different reason than everything above it. Patek does not announce discontinuations, and it never has. A reference simply stops appearing on dealer allocation lists one season, and the trade quietly understands what happened without a single press release confirming it. Multiple independent dealer and collector trackers reported the 5396R 011 and the 5088/100 001 dropped from the active catalog around Watches and Wonders 2026. Pieces that, once genuinely pulled, do not come back into production. I want to flag something plainly instead of dressing it up for drama. Patek itself has issued no official discontinuation list, and its own online watch finder was still showing at least one of these references as this script was being written. What we actually know comes from dealers and collector networks reading the catalog changes after the fact, and those readings do not fully agree yet. That is simply normal for how Patek operates, and it is worth saying out loud rather than pretending otherwise. The mechanism here could not be more different from Fossil Group's slow financial bleed. This is not decline dressed up as strategy. This is a company that discontinues on purpose, precisely because scarcity has always been the actual product being sold. Once a reference leaves the Patek catalog for good, the only path back to it runs through the secondary market, at a price that only ever moves in one direction from that point forward. There is something almost admirable about a company that vanishes its own products on purpose, on its own schedule, with zero explanation owed to anyone. Every other brand on this list is disappearing because it has to. Patek disappears pieces of itself because it wants to, and the collector base has been trained for decades to treat that silence as part of the appeal rather than a red flag. Deliberate. That is what brand number 3's disappearance was. Brand number 2's disappearance is not deliberate at all, and that is exactly what makes it the bigger story. Number 2. Michael Kors watches. Here is the reveal the entire list has quietly been building toward. Michael Kors is, by a wide margin, the most recognizable name on this countdown. Oversized rose gold cases, pave dials that caught the light in every mall photo taken between 2012 and 2018. For most of the 2010s, it was the single best-selling fashion watch brand in America, worn by people who could not have named a single Swiss manufacturer if you had asked them directly. And Michael Kors watches are made by Fossil Group, not licensed loosely on the side, not a minor product line. In February 2025, Fossil Group and Michael Kors publicly announced an extended partnership specifically to keep making watches and jewelry together going forward, because the relationship is central enough to Fossil's entire business that both companies felt the need to say so out loud, in writing, for investors to see. That announcement was not a celebration. It was reassurance, aimed squarely at anyone watching Fossil's other numbers and starting to worry. So walk back through this entire list with me one more time. DKNY, Tory Burch, Skagen, Armani Exchange, Diesel, Zodiac, Kate Spade, Michael Kors. 8 different names on 8 different wrists, sold through 8 completely different marketing budgets and 8 different in-store displays, and every single one of them lives or dies with the exact same company's balance sheet. That is not 8 brands quietly struggling on their own. That is one company struggling 8 times over, wearing 8 different faces so convincingly that almost nobody notices it is the same company underneath each one. Go back and count how many separate marketing budgets, separate campaign shoots, and separate in-store display cases that actually requires. Every one of those brands looked, from the outside, like an independent success or an independent failure. None of them ever really were. They rose and fell together as a single company, and the public conversation around each of them happened as though they were complete strangers to one another. Did you clock the pattern before I said it out loud? Or right around brand number 6? 8 brands sharing one struggling parent company is a pattern. Brand number 1 is not part of that pattern at all, and it is worse than everything above it combined. Number 1. Karl F. Bucherer. Rolex does not fail. That is the entire premise this brand's death sits on top of, and it is exactly why it belongs at number 1. In 2023, Rolex bought Bucherer, the largest authorized Rolex retailer on the entire planet, in a deal that also quietly handed Rolex a smaller, far quieter asset, Karl F. Bucherer, a watchmaking brand founded in Lucerne in 1888, a full 17 years before Rolex itself even existed as a company. For a while, nothing visibly changed. The watches kept shipping. The boutiques kept their lights on every evening like nothing had happened, and most customers walking past those windows had no idea ownership had shifted at all. Then, in February 2025, Swiss business paper Balance reported that Rolex was shutting the brand down completely, not restructuring it, not selling it off to a new owner, ending it permanently. Employees were told on a Friday morning with no advance warning. Around 100 people were affected by the closure. The remaining Karl F. Bucherer boutiques would shut their doors, and the shelf space carrying the brand inside roughly 250 stores worldwide, including Bucherer's own retail network, would be handed over to other brands instead. The reason behind it all is almost mundane, which somehow makes it worse rather than better. Karl F. Bucherer had never turned a real profit. Despite an estimated 250 million Swiss francs invested into it over the years by the family that clearly loved the brand. By most industry accounts, it was a genuine passion project, kept alive by one man's personal devotion long after the spreadsheet stopped making rational sense to anyone else in the room. When that man passed away and Rolex took a colder, more analytical look at the actual books, the math simply did not survive contact with new ownership. Sit with what that actually means for a second. The single most financially untouchable company in the entire watch industry, the brand every other name on this list is implicitly trying to imitate in some small way, looked directly at a 136-year-old Swiss watchmaker and decided calmly that it was not worth keeping alive. If Rolex will not protect real heritage when the numbers refuse to work, no license agreement anywhere else in this industry is genuinely safe either. Somewhere in Lucerne right now, a boutique window that has displayed Karl F. Bucherer watches for years is quietly being cleared out to make room for a brand that actually turns a profit. Nobody is putting up a plaque for what used to be there. There is a version of this story where Karl F. Bucherer becomes a cautionary tale about a family business that stayed sentimental for too long. That is too easy, and it lets the new owner off the hook entirely. Rolex did not inherit a mystery. It inherited a brand with 136 years of documented history, a real customer base, and a real workforce. And it ran the numbers exactly once before deciding none of that history was worth the ongoing cost. That is not villainy. It is just what happens when heritage meets a spreadsheet with no emotional attachment to either. None of these 11 brands died from bad design. Not one of them lost customers because the watches themselves stopped looking good on a wrist. They disappeared because somebody 2 or 3 ownership layers removed ran the numbers, and the brand people actually loved turned out to be a different thing entirely from the brand that made money. That gap was never new. It has just gotten harder to hide from the people wearing the watches, because the same forums, the same comment sections, and the same forensic collectors tracking discontinued references are now also tracking bankruptcy filings and connecting names to parent companies faster than any press release ever will. If you have ever gone looking for a replacement strap or a simple battery swap and found the brand quietly gone from every retailer near you, you already know exactly what this feels like from the inside before I ever put it into words. That confusion is not you missing something obvious. It is a genuinely difficult thing to track, because no company puts "we might not exist in this form next year" anywhere near the price tag. I built a plain, no-nonsense guide to checking which fashion and heritage watch brands are genuinely stable right now versus which ones are sitting inside a struggling parent company. Ownership chain included, brand by brand, updated as new filings and reports come in. It is in the pinned comment. Check it before your next purchase, not after you have already fallen for one. Which one of these did you actually own? Tell me below. I read every single comment on this one. Also, click that like button and subscribe.